So I did a talk this week to a bunch of ladies out of a gym, all on the topic of weight loss. 10 reasons why you can't lose weight. And I want to go through all of these with you because they are my top 10 reasons why people come in struggling with weight. So the way I broke it down to these ladies is the first 3 are the basics, the fundamentals of what you need to ensure are done correctly before we look at any underlying medical conditions why you're not losing weight. So the first one is portion distortion. We need to make sure that we're not overeating mindlessly. So I don't love calorie counting. I don't love that way of living where you have to count and track everything you're eating and measuring. That's just no fun. Who wants to do that? It's like having a second job. But what I do love is the idea of filling out everything you're eating into MyFitnessPal for 1 week. 1 week. It will open your eyes to what you're eating, the amount you're eating, how many calories are actually in those foods, how much fat is in those foods. You know, a serving of nuts is 6 nuts, 2 Brazil nuts, or 6 almonds. You're probably eating more than that without even knowing or realizing. So putting everything into MyFitnessPal to give you a week's worth of calories. Then you can see what you're actually doing correctly and what needs some work. The second one of a fundamental is just mindless eating, you know, licking the spoon as you're cooking or eating things as you're chopping and preparing dinner. Usually by the time you sit down to eat dinner, you've already actually had a meal in total calories just from licking and tasting and chopping and eating. So get rid of the mindless snacking. Don't eat unless you're really hungry, and then focusing on fake versus real ingredients. So people who aren't necessarily losing weight like they'd want are generally consuming a lot of additives, preservatives, fake sugars, aspartame, or things that are sugar-free or fat-free or carb-free or gluten-free, thinking that it's healthier when in fact they're chemical laden, and our body doesn't recognize chemical. Our body doesn't know how to utilize and break down chemicals as fuel and energy. So more often than not, we just store that food because we don't know what to do with it. So focus on whole foods, real ingredients, no chemicals, and that should help with the weight loss. So once we have those fundamentals under control, then we can look at some of these underlying reasons. And I'm gonna break down each one in a little more detail in the next video. These are just what I'm seeing as an overall reason for lack of weight loss or the inability to lose weight or the propensity to gain weight, why you might be gaining weight without even realizing it. So the first one is chronic stress, adrenals, and cortisol. We're gonna go through that and why that is actually related to weight gain. There's a really, really big reason why high stress, high cortisol levels, and adrenal fatigue contribute to weight gain, or the inability to lose weight, or the weight around the midsection, that cortisol belly that so many people have. We're gonna talk about why that happens. The next one is hormone imbalances or estrogen dominance. So cortisol is a hormone, yes, but we're referring here to your hormonal imbalances of your sex hormones. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA, mainly estrogen dominance and how that relates to weight gain. The next one is lack of quality sleep. A lot of us are on our screens before bed. We're on our phones, our iPads, our laptops, and that is interfering with our melatonin and serotonin production. And these are all hormones that control leptin and ghrelin and our satiety centers in our brain, what makes us feel hungry and full. So we're going to talk about that. The next one is food sensitivities and inflammation. So if you are eating foods that you're sensitive to, how does that contribute to weight gain? So we'll discuss that. Next is thyroid dysfunction. So again, thyroid is a hormone that we're going to talk about. One of the most common imbalances that I see for people trying to lose weight. You don't have to be hypothyroid to have thyroid imbalances. So we'll touch on that. The next one is insulin imbalances or blood sugar imbalances. Again, you don't have to be diabetic to have insulin or blood sugar imbalances, and riding a blood sugar roller coaster can absolutely contribute to weight gain. So we will talk about how to get off that roller coaster and stabilize your blood sugars. And then lastly, the psychological reasons behind the reasons we eat. My heart, head, and habit hunger, the emotional eating, the psychological eating, the scheduled eating, all of that needs to be addressed too when we're talking about weight. So stay tuned. We're going to do a series of videos on all of these reasons why people can't lose weight or why they're struggling to lose weight. So the first point I want to talk about as a reason why people can't lose weight is cortisol and stress and adrenal problems. I know you hear about this all the time, the cortisol belly or the ring around the midsection, or you gain weight when you're stressed, but I want you to understand why that happens. So think about, again, I always say this, it's true, think about us as animals. We are programmed as animals under stress to secrete cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. These are all of our stress hormones. Cortisol, adrenaline, and epinephrine and norepinephrine, which come from our adrenal glands, which sit actually on top of our kidneys. So our kidneys in our back, on the top, they have these adrenal glands, and they secrete our stress hormones. So when we're under stress as animals, we get a quick burst of these hormones to allow us to run from a bear. Short bursts of energy that are required. When we are under long-term stress, our body just wants to protect itself. It's self-preservation. It's trying to do us a favor by providing us with energy and stores and reserves for being under stress. It doesn't know when our body is going to need quick energy, so we eat and our body stores these things because it wants to give us reserves at a later time. So think about things like war and famine and drought and all of these other stressful scenarios where animals need the energy for later. So that's technically what's happening in our body. We have an alarm phase of stress, which gets us through the stressful period where we secrete cortisol and adrenaline. It gets us going. But we are under long-term chronic stress. We're talking about the inability to lose weight when we're under long-term chronic stress. And so what happens is if we initially have this amount of cortisol, like a gas tank, we deplete the amount of cortisol that we have just through life and through stress, where we essentially run on empty. That's when we're burned out. That's when we're exhausted. That's when we're adrenally fatigued, and we don't actually have the cortisol reserves to get us through stress. So this is when our body goes to tap into these stores that it's reserved for itself, and that's around that midsection around our belly. So I hope that makes sense. That is the cortisol connection to weight gain. Our body is just in self-preservation. So once we work together to balance your cortisol levels, it allows your body to realize that it's not under such extreme stress. It can let go. It can get rid of these reserves because we've showed the body with a lot of naturopathic support and things that we do that you're no longer in such a fight or flight state. You can move into that parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest, where things are calm and processes take place. That's where you see the weight loss. It's when we're in this sympathetic fight or flight nervous system that we are unable to let go of that weight. Okay, moving on. The next one is hormone imbalances, mainly estrogen dominance. So you've heard me talk about this many times. We have a lot of sex hormones: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and DHEA. And each hormone is responsible for a separate set of symptoms. Estrogen is a fat storing hormone. Women have a lot of estrogen, and that is mainly because we are set up and made to carry babies. So our body has a lot of estrogen, whereas men have a lot of testosterone, and testosterone is a fat burning hormone. So women and men who have a lot of testosterone, generally speaking, have a higher metabolic rate, and women who have a lot of estrogen or an estrogen dominance generally have a harder time losing weight because they have a higher percentage of this hormone that is naturally just a fat storing hormone. So we need to talk about ways that we are exposed to estrogen. Estrogen is everywhere in our environment. We know through plastics and BPAs, through parabens, in a lot of our cosmetics, a lot of xenoestrogens in some of the food that we're eating, our animal proteins, our dairy. A lot of that is injected with estrogens and injected with hormones to plump up and provide fattier cuts of meat. So we're ingesting estrogen through, even our birth control pills getting flushed into the water system. We're drinking this water. We're exposed to a lot of estrogens. And if we have a hard time metabolically clearing these estrogens, or our liver function isn't as great as it should be, a lot of people are storing these estrogens, and we naturally get an estrogen dominance in relation to all of these other hormones. The progesterone specifically, with a lot of women, we see this disconnect where we're progesterone deficient, and that's a whole other topic about symptoms that come with progesterone deficiency. These are things like really bad PMS and PMDD and infertility and a high rate of miscarriage. There's a lot that comes with progesterone deficiency, but the point here from a weight gain perspective is that our estrogen is high in relation to our progesterone, and that makes it really hard to lose weight, and it actually does cause a lot of weight gain. To take that one step further, a lot of us aren't as active as we should be or could be. We don't have a lot of muscle mass. We're not in the gym like we'd like to be, or maybe we are, but for some people who struggle with their weight, it could just be as simple as a lack of testosterone, which is a fat burning hormone in relation to the amount of estrogen. So I always say we want our hormones to be in balance. Think about a symphony. Every instrument in the symphony needs to be working together in order to get the final product. And if our hormones are working up here and down here and somewhere in the middle and we're completely out of balance, we don't have a perfectly hormonally balanced system. And that makes it really difficult to lose weight. So I would say, from that standpoint, we really need to look at ways to bring down our estrogen levels if we are estrogen dominant. And again, we do that through a lot of naturopathic support while bringing up your testosterone, again, through various ways, and then bringing up your testosterone to meet us. So we're all in alignment. I hope that makes sense. So the next point I want to touch on with our inability to lose weight is consistent quality sleep. We are on our screens at night more than ever before. We are looking at blue light. This is stimulating our brain to turn on when at that time of night we should be shutting down all of the processes that go on. There's two reasons why you gain weight or you have a harder time losing weight when you're not sleeping. There is a direct correlation. When you're not sleeping, you can very easily gain weight and you have a very hard time losing weight. The number one thing is when you're tired, what happens? You crave sugar, you crave carbs, your body is tired, and again, self-preservation, your body wants to protect itself and it craves what will give it quick energy. Sugar and carbs are the quickest sources of energy, so pay attention. When you're really tired and you haven't had a good sleep, what does your body crave the next day? It craves carbs and sugars, and it's hungrier. The next day after a really poor sleep, you might notice that you are hungry, and that's just because your body wants energy, and food will provide it with energy. The second reason why you have a harder time losing weight when you're not sleeping is because when you sleep, that's when your body is actually making melatonin and serotonin, and all of the hormonal processes that take place are happening in our sleep. That's regenerative, that's restorative. That is where all of our physiological processes tend to happen. And if you're not having a dark room and a restful sleep, then you're probably not making a lot of the hormones that we need that control our appetite and our hunger and our satiety centers in our brain. So good restful sleep is such an important place to start. If you want to lose weight or if you're struggling with losing weight, then talk to me about your sleep hygiene. Naturopathically, there's again so much we can do to help you sleep, to get into a restful sleep. But first things first, turn off your phone an hour before bed. Stop eating an hour to 3 hours before bed. Turn the temperature down in your room, make it a cool room, get blackout blinds or wear a mask to make sure that your room is dark. That's a great place to start. And then another thing that I often recommend from a sleep hygiene perspective is to turn your alarm clock around, because nothing is worse than waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a time that invokes anxiety. So if you turn your alarm clock around, you don't even know what time it is. That's where we'll start. Get a good sleep to start with a weight loss program. Food sensitivities. I love this topic, but from a weight loss perspective. So we're not talking necessarily about digestion, although digestion does play a huge role in weight loss. Our ability to digest food and properly break down and assimilate the food and the nutrients will definitely help with weight loss. But from a food sensitivity and weight loss perspective is this. If your body is sensitive to a food, it views that food as a foreign substance. we don't know how to break down and utilize for energy a foreign substance. Our body doesn't like it, our body doesn't want it, it creates inflammation, it creates an immune-mediated response, and those are all things that our body tends to then use these foods for storage. It doesn't like it, it doesn't want to use it, so it gets stored. So oftentimes when we test you for a food sensitivity and then you follow these guidelines, you remove these food sensitivities, the first thing that happens is weight loss. Your body brings its inflammatory levels down and you start to lose weight because your body is no longer getting inundated with foods that it has a really hard time digesting and absorbing, and starts to lose weight. So there's a really great place to start, is getting your food sensitivities checked and tested. It can be as benign as some beans, some nuts, some veggies, some fruit, some protein. It doesn't have to be the big players like gluten and dairy. You know, I often see people who come in and say, I've eliminated gluten, I've eliminated dairy, I've eliminated all of these known inflammatory foods, and I'm still not losing weight. And that's likely because you have your own personal unique food sensitivities that are just creating an imbalance in you, and we need to discover those and eliminate those, and then you will see that you start to lose weight. The next is thyroid dysfunction. We talk a lot about thyroid dysfunction together. There's a big difference between optimal and normal when it comes to your thyroid. So your thyroid is a gland that's here. It's a butterfly-shaped gland, and it controls your metabolism. It controls a lot of other things, but mainly your metabolism and your energy production. And when you don't have a proper functioning thyroid, all of these processes start to slow down. But the frustrating thing is that a lot of people only get their TSH checked because that's what's covered under MSP. And if your TSH is normal, you think your thyroid is normal, that you don't actually have a thyroid imbalance that's contributing to some of your weight concerns. What I want to say about that is your thyroid is comprised of many different hormones, not just TSH. There's T3, there's T4, there are thyroid cofactors and things that are required to make this conversion happen from inactive thyroid to active thyroid. These are things like selenium and zinc and iodine and B vitamins. So we need to ensure that we are looking at your entire thyroid and its antibodies, not just your TSH. So we want to look at the T3 function, the T4 function, your thyroid antibodies, and your thyroid cofactors. Once we've addressed that, then we need to look at your range. Just because you fall within a normal range does not mean that your thyroid is functioning optimally. An optimal thyroid is 1.0 or less, even 1.0 to 1.5. So we want to work together to get your thyroid in that optimal range. And there are a lot of things that affect our thyroid. So, you know, adrenals, we talked about cortisol, we talked about stress. Our cortisol function and our thyroid function go hand in hand. And if you're under a lot of stress, it affects the functioning of your thyroid. If your diet isn't great, if you're on certain drugs and medications, if you're taking your thyroid irregularly or with food or with coffee, you know, there's a lot of interactions there. So thyroid is a really big place that I go with my patients, but I just want you to know that those are the things I look at. If your thyroid is optimal versus normal, and not just looking at your TSH, we need to address the other factors of your thyroid. And once we do that and we balance that, you start to lose weight. And then lastly, I just want to touch base about insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance and the inability to lose weight. So when we're talking about blood sugars, carbohydrates and sugars spike your blood sugars. And when you're eating a lot of carbs or a lot of sugars and not necessarily balancing it with proteins or fats, you're riding a blood sugar roller coaster. What we need to do is take you off the roller coaster, get off the carbs, get off the sugars, bring in more protein, bring in more fats, and that will stabilize your blood sugars. So a great rule of thumb is to have a carb or a sugar with a protein and fat. Think like apple and peanut butter or apple and cheese, just so that you can balance that. And also another really great tip for balancing your blood sugars is actually practicing intermittent fasting, because it allows your glycogen stores to be burned off before having more carbs and sugars in your system. So when you're fasting for 16 or 18 hours, your body is actually able to tap into those stores and tap into those reserves and use those glycogen stores as fuel or as energy. So instead of just storing all the carbs and sugars that you're eating, by intermittent fasting, your body is actually tapping into those stores and using them for energy. And then anything you eat on top of that is just a bonus where your body is efficiently burning. And you're only eating in an 8-hour or 6-hour window where the calories in that window can be lessened just by a function of less time that you are able to eat. So balancing your insulin levels, balancing your blood sugar levels by just limiting the amount of overall carbohydrates and sugars that you're eating. I don't necessarily think it needs to be as low as 20 grams of carbs or sugars a day like you would see in a ketogenic diet. I mean, that's great for its own purpose, but I would aim anywhere between even, 50, just for the general person. Anything below 50 is probably a good place to go, focusing more on fats and protein, and then practicing intermittent fasting, which will help metabolize those carbs and help metabolize those sugars in the form of those glycogen stores being utilized.